while we're waiting for him, why don't we go ahead and call the meeting to order? And we will start with the approval of the minutes. Councilmember Bergan, do you approve the minutes as written?
I do, thank you.
All right, and I do as well. So we'll go ahead and move forward. So on the consent agenda, I did have a couple of questions. Councilmember Bergan, do you have any questions first?
I do not. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So just general stuff. It seems like there are a lot of change orders. They're all really small, but there are a lot of them. So I was just wondering if that's just a matter of typical changes that you would expect, or if there's anything that staff would call out as a factor influencing such a large number of change orders.
Yeah, so you're talking about the cumulative change order amounts in the, which is kind of our running total on all the projects, right?
Yeah, and again, they're not large amounts at all. It's like less than 1% total amount, but it just seemed like there were a large number of items. Is that just because it was for the whole year of 2024? Or I'm just trying to understand the number. It seems like it's more projects that have change orders than I recall from the past.
Yeah, and I think Sorvine's on. I think some of those might be because we now are doing phased funding on some of the projects. So we have money dedicated in say 2024 or 2023, and it's a multi-year project. And so we'll bring in additional funding in year 2, which then shows up in the change order column. So it's not, so some of them are not necessarily what we've historically had as change orders because of change of scope or costs or things like that. So I think the big amounts that you're seeing in that cumulative column, like on the Griswold solids handling, Senac Creek, those were, and First Creek, those were phased funded projects. I'm pretty sure. Sorvine, is that correct?
Yes, Marshall, that's correct. And then the phase funded ones are identified by those double asterisks on the side.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, so maybe, okay, so the double asterisks are all the phase funded projects. So maybe we, oh, and it's down there, less phase funded change orders. So,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, all those double asterisks are not necessarily changed scopes or amounts or anything like that. It's just the multi-year project that we brought funding in over at least 2 years. So if you take all of those out, we're looking at 1, 2, 3, like 5 or 6 projects that had change orders cumulatively last year, I think.
yes,
Okay, so that is more typical. Okay, yep, that answers my question. Thank you, that's helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Councilmember Coombs?
Yes, please go ahead.
Actually, I just wanted to say congratulations on the grants. There were 3 grant awards and good work.
Thank you. We like grants. They're a little bit hard to administer, but we like the money.
Yes, thank you for calling that out, Councilmember Bergan. All right, and then I had just a question on water supply. Everything looks great. It looks like we're kind of above average on every metric except for drought, which we're lower than we were this time last year, which is excellent. I noticed that it looks like we're kind of at the highest level of WISE distributions that we've been at on the, like, for the years indicated on the graph. And so I was just wondering, is that because we have more water that we can distribute through WISE without impacting our supplies? or does it have anything to do with the periods of time when we had stopped WISE distributions due to our own water supply issues? So just if there's any comment on the WISE distributions.
Good catch. I think it's primarily because their ability to take the water that we had in the agreement has increased. So we've been ramping WISE up over the years. So what you're seeing more recently is indicative of our actual WISE agreement, the contract obligation. It may go up a little more even, John.
Yeah. This year, it was primarily Aurora making most of the deliveries. Denver had a little bit of water they were contributing, so it probably would have been a larger total had Denver's contributions been kind of on par with Aurora's, but we're gearing up for full delivery, so.
And full delivery, are we anticipating this year or is that next year?
Everything goes according to plan and the DIA connection gets put in place. The new WISE year starting in June 2025, that's when we plan on starting the first of the 10-year blocks.
Yeah. So it'll go up a little more even the next time, and then we should see it kind of stabilize unless we have drought shortage type situation.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much for just sharing that information. That's helpful to understand. All right, Councilmember Bergan, anything else before we move on to the next agenda items?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so our next item is the Integrated Water Master Plan 2 resolution with Sarah Young.
Hi, good morning. Welcome back, Councilmember Coombs. Great to see you. And also Councilmember Bergan, glad you're still with us here. So I know both of you are really familiar with the Integrated Water Master Plan. I know Councilmember Coombs, it's been a little bit, but we were able to finalize the Integrated Water Master Plan this last year. And there's some foundational elements in the plan, just as kind of the refresher. It's the overall plan, everything from water supply to transmission, distribution, treatment. And in this round of the plan, which is a little different than the first Integrated Water Master Plan, we did have more kind of detailed and specific level of service goals. Those are a lot of what we're trying to capture in this resolution. So the few that we call out, the first one being maintaining that 1 year of critical demand in storage for an emergency reserve. One important point about that is foundational for a lot of our storage projects in the future, including Wild Horse Reservoir. And then it also talks about, the more definition about our watering restrictions. As an example, stage 1 watering restrictions, no more than 3 out of 10 years, down to kind of stage 3, 1 in 20 years. It just further defines that frequency of watering restrictions. And then there's a lot of levels of service around water quality, as you would expect. Dissolved solids is just one example. Pressures within the system is another example. So I guess the overall idea behind the resolution is formalizing kind of the adoption of those levels of service, as well as the capital improvement projects for the Integrated Water Master Plan. So that is, since you're both very familiar with the document and kind of the history there, that's the idea.
But that being said, the idea of a resolution is a little bit of a new idea. So we haven't previously brought a resolution to council. We've brought the Integrated Water Master Plan kind of summary and presented it as an informational item and made sure everybody was aware. What's going on in the permitting process for Wild Horse, though, is that they need a governing body approval of our assumptions that are justifying the need for Wild Horse. So that's the key difference. Sarah kind of alluded to the criticality to justifying future storage. We need the formalization of the governing body of our planning document to move forward in the permitting process for Wild Horse. So new idea with the resolution. That's why little bit of a question for you is we've got a kind of abbreviated study session format these days. So are you comfortable moving the resolution forward through the typical study session process and then to the floor? Would either of you be, or both of you be interested in sponsoring? How would you recommend we approach the approval of the resolution? And or would you like more details on the master plan?
Councilmember Bergan?
When you say more details, are you talking to the committee or to the full council?
Either or, but probably again, the committee format is now where we kind of take all the sausage making details. So we could definitely bring more details here and walk you through the integrated water master plan. I think we
July.
did that in July. So you probably saw those, Councilmember Bergan, Councilmember Coombs, you probably did not have quite that luxury. So the
Yeah.
time is a little interesting too.
I mean, I'm familiar with it. I'm happy to move it forward, but Councilmember Coombs, I'm defer to you if you want to have a presentation before it goes to council. I mean, I think the resolution makes sense, like you said, to formalize the need for future water supply reservoirs.
Yeah, and I'm comfortable with that. I think we're good to move it forward. I know most things are going on consent these
Yep.
days, and so that would be my only question is maybe we could have not a full presentation of the entire plan because the council has had that in the past, and I believe even our current council has had some presentation on that. So I think just giving some high level information about the resolution and the need for the resolution would be helpful rather than putting it on consent.
Okay, potentially kind of like the level we just did here, maybe an overview like that.
Yeah.
When it study it, okay, perfect.
Great, thank
Yep.
you.
And then I would be happy to co-sponsor with Councilmember Bergan. You can put both of us on there. That's good.
Sounds good.
Fantastic. Thank you.
All right, perfect. So I think that's all we've got for item 3. Item 4 is the Park County Commissioner Wild Horse update, again with Sarah.
All right, I'm going to take, see if I can get this PowerPoint shared and large at the same time. Let's see.
The sharing work
Sharing worked. Now the
and the large one.
what?
There we
It's a
go.
good day. It's a good day. I'll take it. Okay, so and I'm not sure, Councilmember Coombs, if you're aware, Councilmember Bergan, I think you might be, but this end of last year, my position, I transitioned out of the assistant general manager for planning and engineering temporarily to lead kind of the project director role for Wild Horse. And so I know you've seen a lot of other people who have done a lot of really hard work on the Wild Horse project in previous years, but that's kind of what I've been transitioning into and why I'm giving this presentation, why I'll be involved in kind of future updates and information here. I just wanted to mention, I have Lauren Nance. Oh, sorry, Nance, that's your previous name. Lauren Magger, who is one of the people who has been doing extraordinary work on this for the last several years. And she's been doing a lot of work in the permitting space. So she's here to keep me out of trouble, just in case I say something wrong. just a real quick overview of what the presentation, a little bit about Wild Horse. Some of these things we will have been through before, but a little bit more about the project details and the permitting details. I will tell you, I have been learning so much over the last few months in terms of what NEPA actually is and how robust it is. And I'm going to take an attempt to try to explain that a little bit in terms of what I've been learning. So just kind of a reminder, so Wild Horse identified the storage needs required for us to meet the future. And Wild Horse is one of the projects in order to do that. The time frame for Wild Horse is specific to 2075. That is the horizon that we're looking at in kind of the justification and the EIS for this project. The size that is needed is around 90,000 acre feet. And it's just south of Hartselle. Coombs, you missed our wild, Mr. Toad's wild ride when we took the Water Policy Committee out there this last year. But if you're interested, we could go do that again. The main points, just to remind you, it's a favorable location, this general area. It's kind of interesting. If you look at the picture on the right, it shows, where Denver, Castle Rock, you've got Colorado Springs, and you can kind of see these mountain ranges that surround this relatively flat area in the middle. And you can see the kind of three other reservoirs that are there. So Antero Reservoir and 11 Mile are on the left and the right. Those are Denver reservoirs. Spinney is ours. And then this Wild Horse location. There's a reason for that. In terms of how that location is compared to where all of the major basins are in this area, it's systematically a really good location for capturing a variety of water rights from the different basins in this area. So a little bit more, we've been through this. This is also in the master plan. We're assuming about 760,000 people by 2075 for that time frame that we're working on with Wild Horse. But you'll be very familiar with this map. And also this map that kind of gets to what I was speaking about before, how this fits into the system. There's our Wild Horse. That's my favorite thing I did all week. So I'm glad I'm adding value. But that is basically kind of the high level map overview where you can see the different parts of the system. Again, I know you guys are very familiar with this and how the system works, but that's where it's located. Project details. Again, just kind of a reminder, one of the things that's interesting about this, which is different actually than Spinney, 11 Mile, and Antero, is that it's off channel. So those other three reservoirs are basically on the South Platte River or different branches of the South Platte River. This is a reservoir that is located kind of in an uplands, if you will. It's not technically an uplands, but it's off channel in an area that topographically makes sense to store water. But it's basically fed, instead of by the river itself, it's fed by our Antero pipeline. And then it would be piped into the reservoir, piped out of the reservoir back into Spinney. So locationally, that's generally how it works. I have a tag in here for County Road 53 because County Road 53 runs through this footprint, and there is a relocation that would be required for County Road 53 here. And feel free to, interrupt me at any time if you've got questions. So this is a little information on the dams itself. Actually, I'm going to go, they're not that clear to see here. So this is looking towards the south. So if you're kind of up by where, and can you see my cursor by any chance? Oh, yeah. Great. So the next rendering that we're going to look at is basically standing. Oh, no. And now it disappeared. Standing where my cursor was, where that red line comes out, and looking to the south. So, so there's three different dams that are required for the reservoir. The main dam, it's about 1,000 feet long, kind of at the top, and then about 160 feet tall. It's important, and that's basically the structure of the dam. I almost got into weedy details about, how the grout curtain below the dam. I won't go there. But anyway, the three different dams, the main dam is at the front end of the canyon. we're looking at 3 different types of dam. It's either earth, rock fill, or it would be concrete in this location. The other 2, the east dam and the west dam, you can see, actually you can kind of see on the east dam here where that is County Road 53 that is up in this area. And that's the road that would have to be located. So basically the east dam goes over where County Road 53 is. So then the east dam, 55 feet tall by about 2,400 feet long. And then the west dam is about 70 to 100 feet long and it's about 110 feet tall. That west dam is required in order to keep the site on favorable geology, basically. This is just a couple of other renderings looking at it from different angles. You know, the one on the bottom left you can see is looking at that west, or that kind of that dam that's on the south, but we call the west dam, looking towards the north. So permitting. So we've got 3 different buckets of permitting that we're working through for this project. Park County is one of them, and the team previously and now still today, we're working really closely with Park County, as would be expected. The formal permitting process for Park County, though, is 1041, and I'll be totally honest, until I got into this project, 1041, I knew that people were interested. It makes things complicated, but I didn't really understand it. And so when digging into it, the state areas of interest that basically the county in this instance are permitting on the state's behalf, include these 5 that have been listed here. So, but what's interesting is currently Park County only has indicated authority over the top 3 areas. So the new domestic water and sewage treatment systems, as well as wildlife habitat areas and mineral resources. The mineral resource locations, though, are not in around Wild Horse, and nor are the wildlife habitat areas that they've identified. And one could argue that the reservoir isn't a treatment system. However, other parts of state interest or state activities include major utility facilities and municipal industrial water projects. The county has let us know that they are actually revisiting their 1041 process right now. They're in the process of doing that. They've had some pretty significant changeover they do have a new commissioner that's getting sworn in this week. They also have a new county manager that they have been identifying that will be in the next few weeks be brought on board. And the staff has informed me that they have already been in the process of revisiting their 1041 kind of regulations. So I would expect that we can see a new version of that come out from them sometime this year that would include some of the things that they don't currently include as their permitting purview. There's several different state permitting processes. I will mention both Park County and various portions of the state are included in the NEPA process, which we'll touch on later. But these are the state requirements that we also have to follow. Basically any of the federal project fish and wildlife mitigation plans that are developed as a part of the NEPA, the state has a separate approval process that they also have to review and approve that those mitigations are appropriate and from their perspective. We have a CDOT permit for a crossing of Highway 9 for some infrastructure. We've been working very closely with the state engineer's office for the dam safety from a dam safety perspective. We've been keeping them up to date through the progress of design. And then the Regulation 87 with the new state dredge and fill process that's around wetlands. And the Wild Horse site currently is exempted from the state dredge and fill permit based on the fact that it has been established by the Corps of Engineers that it is not a waters of the U.S. The wetlands that are on site are not waters of the U.S. And there is an exemption provision in the dredge and fill program that indicates that any jurisdictional determinations from the Corps prior to 2023, I think it was May, then are exempted from the state dredge and fill process. So we have been coordinating closely with the state on that. And that's just a little note in terms of the state permitting. So federal, so those other ones were the easy part. And now we're in NEPA. So just a little bit of an overview. So NEPA has various requirements depending on the size, complexity, and impacts of a project. Our project, just because of the complexity and size of it, honestly, the environmental impact statement, full environmental impact statement is required. What's unique about Wild Horse is that typically the Corps of Engineers is the lead jurisdiction, because as we were looking at before, reservoirs are on channel more often than not, which means that wetlands is the biggest area of impact, which is regulated by the Corps of Engineers. In our instance, because it's off channel, the Corps of Engineers, and because it's been determined that the wetlands on site are minor enough that they're not waters of the U.S., this has led to a different federal agency, which is the Bureau of Land Management, which is a really unique situation. So there's two reasons why the Bureau of Land Management is the primary jurisdiction for this. On the map on screen, you'll see two yellow parcels. Those yellow parcels are surface lands owned by the BLM that have never been disposed of. And then the areas that are shown in kind of the hatched area, those are federal mineral estates. So at some point in the past, the surface rights and the mineral estates were disconnected. And so the BLM actually owns all of the federal mineral estates that are shown in the hatching. So anything that we would do, like for instance, quarry materials for a dam in those areas also creates that nexus to the BLM. The process in and of itself, the EIS process, there was recent legislation this last year, I think it was this last year, that basically said that an EIS process must be completed within 2 years. What's interesting about that is that for these types of complex projects, the approach that agencies, and BLM is not alone in this, but the approach that agencies are taking is that they're basically asking to do a draft EIS and all the evaluations associated with a draft EIS ahead of the NOI process. So that's what we've been working with. And the NOI is basically the notice of intent. That's basically the start of that 2-year timeframe. And so a delicate balance in what we've worked, or what we're working with currently with the BLM, is what questions can wait to be answered during the actual process versus the questions that we know are going to get asked and the information that we need to provide in the draft version of the report. Again, the whole point of NEPA is that it's an environmentally based consequence requirement to just make sure that environmental consequences are being evaluated as part of their decision-making process. That's the whole point of it. One of the important things that we have to do is say, why do we need this project? What they call that is the goal and objective. Our specific goal and objective in the EIS process is to meet our 2075 demands while maintaining an accessible emergency reserve. That, as Marshall had talked about when we were talking about the integrated water master plan resolution, that completely connects to that kind of foundation for the need for storage in that document. And then in a kind of that supports that goal and objective. Based on our system configuration, that means that we need about 90,000 acre-feet of storage, and that it needs to be located on the downstream or the outlet end of the Otero system, because that's where accessibility comes in for us. The Otero system is our kind of the biggest point of, or single point of failure, and is not impossible, but it, not feasible to have basically a duplicate system in that space. And if in certain areas of failure, the ability to just go replace a pipe becomes significantly more challenging and takes more time. So that is why that second paragraph is basically the justification from a system perspective of our goal and objective, and is really important because when we're looking at alternatives, like when all the other agencies are looking at, well, how else could you meet your purpose and need or your goal and objective? How else could you meet your 2075 demands and have accessible emergency reserve? We have to look at the world of possibilities in order to do that, to say that we looked at those to make sure that this is the least impactful, environmentally impactful project. And so those couple of points are very important, and we'll be talking about those a lot throughout the process.
Which is the whole purpose of NEPA.
Yeah.
To make sure we're meeting our needs in the least environmentally impactful way.
And one, and that's exactly right. One interesting difference between the BLM and the Corps of Engineers, and there could be several different agencies that are a lead agency. You'll hear potentially a term from the Corps of Engineer that is the least lead put. It's the least environmentally damaging something, but I can't remember what the last two things stand for, but the gist of it is they're entirely focused on environmental impacts like wetlands. What you'll see, so the NEPA, like overall, when we're saying that we're going to be evaluating the environmental impacts, what that translates to in NEPA is actually quite a bit more than what you would consider environmental impacts. This list of 25 different resource evaluations, each one of these things have to be evaluated in technical detail for both the proposed action, which is Wild Horse, and the alternatives. So, you would think about air quality and wetlands in the terms of environmental, but understanding rangeland, understanding the socioeconomics, understanding the visual impacts, as an example, all of these things have to be evaluated and weighed against each other for both our project and others. And there's extraordinary technical details and methodologies that have to be agreed upon for each one of these that all feed into the EIS. Councilmember Bergan.
Yeah, thank you. In light of what's going on with all the wildfires in California, I would think having this reservoir in this location, there would be, an argument to say that it's necessary for mitigation of any kind of wildfires as well, because having that reservoir there, wouldn't it be helpful?
Yeah, that's a super interesting point. So as we're working through the process and the number of different agencies that are included in the NEPA process and our evaluation of this will all weigh into not only the resource impacts, but also likely will be bringing to the table considerations that are important to their agency in the process. So we haven't come across to that, I guess, as a specific request or piece of the EIS process yet, but I would be surprised if that doesn't come up.
Well, I was just thinking a lot of time, well, you've kind of heard in California, some of the environmental groups that possibly didn't want to have brush cleared and things like that because of some endangered species. And obviously, that's important, but if that becomes an issue, I guess the argument is, it doesn't do any good to save a species if it's going to all burn down. So I guess I was just looking at it from a perspective of
of
how
benefit.
it would benefit. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or benefit or offset other concerns.
Yep. And it is a really good point. And those types, maybe not that one specifically, but those types of considerations, like another example like that, maybe not directly and quite as kind of safety critical in nature, but recreation is another one that kind of falls in that space a little bit, right? Where it's like, here is a potential advantage to the Park County community, is an opportunity for recreation in the future. And so those items are kind of included in the process to, like you said, kind of say, oh, and here's the other consideration for it in terms of benefits of this facility as we move through here are the impacts, right? So yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I guess at the end of the day, this was the most shocking thing to me. And why, when I was like, why is this permit taking so long? Which I think is what everybody thinks, right? And it is a shocking amount of technical work. And then when you add on the implementation plans that we're not going to go through, but this is the list of them that are also required, and the fact that it's not just the BLM who's reviewing the approaches, the data, the impact evaluation, it's all of these other agencies as well. It takes time, is the reality of it. It just takes time. And what we want to make sure is that we put in an appropriate amount of time, because at the end of the day, we're looking for a positive record of decision for our project. And when we get challenged in court, when or if we get challenged in court, we want to make sure, or basically the BLM, if they say you can, go ahead and move forward with your project, we're authorizing you for mineral estates and for surface rights, then they potentially get sued for that decision. Right now, the Army Corps of Engineers is getting sued for their decision on the Moffett Reservoir that is currently under construction by Denver Water. So it is something that we have to be paying very close attention to, making sure that everything from our goal and objective, our demands that, establish that, all of the different resources and how they've been evaluated, all the alternatives all of that information, we need to make sure is legally defensible as possible, because a court challenge to the BLM just extends the time frame even longer. So it is important that we take our time on the front end, and that is what we're doing. The last thing, I guess just a super quick land acquisition. Lyle Whitney from our team has been doing a phenomenal job with the Real Property Services Group, down to just a few remaining unwilling sellers. Also includes sellers that we haven't been able to get a hold of. But for the most part, everything that's in light pink has been acquired, and there's still several that are under contract moving forward. The engineering design, there's a lot of geotech work and design that's been done by both Tetra Tech and Dewberry. Both of those are at 30%. And I guess that's just an example of that. Construction management, we do have a contractor on board to help us start really understanding they're putting cost estimates together for us, basically to understand more so what that opinion of probable cost is at the 30% design level. This is a joint venture between Flatiron, Dragados, and Sukit, who have one of the other projects that they all built together was the Isabella Dam project. So this is a joint venture that we've been very happy with so far. And they are also helping us look at some of the requirements we have in design to make sure that they're constructible and that they're efficient and effective. Let's see. I want to step back just really quickly. So this, one other thing to mention in terms of the process, what you see on the right-hand side, I had mentioned just briefly alternatives. So the Wild Horse Reservoir project, you kind of can see here in the middle, a couple of the other alternatives that BLM is moving forward in the process or proposing to move forward in the process is an enlargement of the Spinney Dam, as well as a site down here, which we're calling Wild Horse South. So those will be evaluated in the process to, again, compare impacts. And then ultimately, we will, as we get further in the process in the draft to final EIS process, we'll understand a little bit better about the differing impacts between those alternatives, and what that looks like for their record of decision moving forward. So more to come, I think, in this space as this moves forward a little bit more. Councilmember Bergan?
What was the reservoir you said? The alternative, not the Wild House North, the big one, south, I mean.
So Wild Horse South, then this up here is Spinney Mountain Reservoir.
Oh,
And that's
okay.
Spinney Mountain Reservoir enlargement. So it's
Oh,
like making that dam higher and increasing the storage at that location.
so did we ever consider those? Since they're
Yeah.
considering them, we did.
Yep.
And so we came to the conclusion our location made more sense.
Yes.
We
So
did.
when you say they're going to evaluate, are they just, don't we just present like why we chose what we did? And
It's part of the NEPA process, it requires that they evaluate alternatives
separately.
to show that the proposed action is what that's basically called, that the proposed action is the least impactful. So we, yes, had looked at several other sites around the Wild Horse location. And had also considered the Spinney location. Wild Horse South is something that we had previously evaluated. And I think because of I think there's a number of reasons, but the BLM is interested in looking at that more closely. One of those reasons is the cultural impacts on the Wild Horse site are something that are of kind of a question or a concern. And so they are also interested in understanding what that might look like for that southern side as well.
And is cost even like considered for NEPA?
So optionally, you can include cost in as one of your evaluation metrics, but it is something that the agencies are not encouraged to include because of their whole goal is to make sure that the alternative considers all of the environmental factors. We will, however, be including costs as information to be presented in the process, but it is not necessarily, from the agency's perspective, they don't necessarily use that as a part of their decision-making process.
Which is crazy. It's crazy because if let's say cost was double for one of them, so they would say, oh, too bad, because we prefer less, whatever, environmental impact, something. And yet that could preclude a reservoir for being built for 50 years because of cost. So like basically you've taken away even an opportunity to have, the reserve and to meet future needs. I don't know. I don't understand any of this bureaucracy.
I think so. While it's not a primary criteria for the NEPA process, keep in mind that a lot of the things that drive cost up also have environmental impacts. So it's not captured directly, but it is captured indirectly through the other criteria. So for example, if you're having to import a lot more material to build a dam,
Mhm.
costs go way up, but also environmental impacts go way up. So it's not a primary consideration, and that might be part of why it's not necessarily a primary consideration, because all of the other primary factors on determining environmental impact have a cost component.
Okay.
So that's kind of interesting. And a couple of things on Wild Horse. Sarah mentioned the cultural resources, which is something we have learned about since we started the process. Initially, those weren't identified on the existing site. The other thing that's evolved a little bit on the existing Wild Horse site is that east, right? The east dam, the big saddle
Oh,
dam.
West Ham, yeah.
The west. Okay, the west, the big saddle dam on the upstream end was much, much smaller when we first started the Wild Horse site. So there are a couple of things that have evolved a little bit that will make the alternatives evaluation kind of interesting.
So I think, and to that point, I'm sorry, Councilmember Coombs, did you want to?
Oh, no, go ahead. I'll ask questions after you finish.
So to that point, so part of the NEPA process, so that evaluation of alternatives, like Marshall was saying, is part, I mean, it's the reason that or part of the reason that the process exists. There's opportunity in the kind of NEPA process to evolve the kind of the preferred alternative and how that all fits together as you go from kind of the draft EIS to the final EIS process. So the first alternatives conversation we're having with the cooperating agencies, that whole list of agencies that I showed you, is actually this coming Thursday, so tomorrow afternoon. That'll be kind of the kickoff of, okay, here are the alternatives that are moving forward for further evaluation. And there's flexibility in the process in terms of how kind of alternatives shake out at the end of the day, I guess is a way to say that. I'm sorry, Councilmember Coombs?
Oh, no, that's okay. That's helpful. Sorry. So you said you all are having the meeting on Thursday to discuss the potential alternatives.
Right.
So tomorrow.
Tomorrow, yeah. And so these alternatives are what currently the BLM is proposing that we move forward, plus a small version of Wild Horse and ASR in town, so aquifer storage and recovery in town. And we'll get some feedback tomorrow and see where that goes. I don't know if I talked about East Point at all.
Okay, cool. I had just a couple questions about the land acquisitions component. I know we're nearly there on the current Wild Horse site. So if we don't get a permit for the current Wild Horse site, what happens to all of that land that we have acquired for the purpose of building this dam?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, the land can be resold, right? It's an asset. There's also, well, I guess that would be
Or
Yeah.
traded. So
right.
the property ownership up here is interesting in that there are significant large property owners and some smaller ones. So that what we're calling Wild Horse South alternative now is primarily owned by one of the property owners we've been working with on the proposed Wild Horse site. So, but yeah, we would end up having to exchange, sell, trade, do all kinds of things with property differently if one of the other alternatives ends up being less impactful. Now, you probably caught what I was alluding to is if one of those bubbles up to be less environmentally impactful, it will probably also be less costly. So but adds some additional work and burden associated with, we've been moving forward, acquiring all the property for the existing site. So it's an interesting process. We think it will work out to the ratepayers' benefit as long as it doesn't kill all of us in the process.
For real.
So I just have one other question related to land acquisitions, which is if it was found that a Spinney expansion was less environmentally impactful, which seems like it has a huge footprint. So
Yeah.
that seems less likely, but if we did end up having to go that direction, do we have the land? And then would there also be impact on the land where we currently have buildings, including caretaker housing on that site in the footprint that's proposed for a Spinney expansion?
Yeah, for Spinney in particular, some of that land we do own, much of it some of it we don't, I guess I'll say.
Most of it we don't.
Most of it we don't. The caretaker houses, I believe, are a little bit further up in elevation from kind of up in this. Oh, come on, cursor. Where are you? And I need you. Oh, there you are. Up in this general vicinity. And then the maintenance and buildings and such are kind of down in this area. So in terms of our infrastructure having to move, we'd have to look more closely at the caretaker homes, but at first blush, I don't think so. I will mention the Spinney alternative, because of the amount of wetlands that are around Spinney itself, it is very unlikely that that is considered the least impactful. However, if that happens as an example for Wild Horse South, Marshall had mentioned that northern, basically half of that reservoir is part of a large property group called Elk Mountain Cattle Company that we've been working with closely for a long time. And there's for kind of other reasons, there's already conversations about that. But the property on the south side of that reservoir would have to be acquired. I will also mention that we are preparing for this alternative being brought into the process to ensure that it's feasible, because one of the ways to take an alternative out of the process is if it's technically infeasible to build. And it is important, I think, at this point in time that we ensure that it is technically feasible to build. So if they're going to continue to move it forward as something that's being evaluated. So we are proposing what's called a letter of authorization to the Corps, or I'm sorry, to the BLM, because they have federal mineral. They don't have any surface rights in Wild Horse South, but they do have federal mineral estates. So they have jurisdiction over the area around that dam. And so we are asking to be able to go do some geotechnical work to ensure feasibility on this location this coming summer. Again, just kind of preparing for understanding really, really what that looks like a little bit more robustly.
Okay, thank you. That is a lot, and you are correct that it's a very complex process. I guess if folks were aware of this complexity, they wouldn't be thinking that we're just running around trying to throw reservoirs down wherever we feel like it.
It's a good point. It's a good point. The very last slide, I just wanted to mention, so we've talked through this, so that if we are able to achieve, which is our current goal, to get a notice of intent from the BLM by early 2026, which there's a lot of, not only I think one of the big areas to keep in mind, stream flow and impacts on stream flow is a very big question to everyone. For us to understand stream flow in all three basins, because it's all part of that, we need to get demands. We have to understand how we're impacting climate change, blah, 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 blah. There's a ton of work in that space that needs to be done this next year. But it's still our goal. And then barring any massive additional evaluations, depending on how far streamflow impacts go, we're hoping for a record of decision in early 2028, which would mean that assuming we had design ready by that time, and as you had mentioned, Councilmember Coombs, land acquisition, then we anticipate that the Wild Horse Reservoir would take about 5 years to construct. So mid-2030s is currently what we are shooting for. And just so that you're aware, in the Integrated Water Master Plan, the timing in which we need this reservoir online is around 2045. So it makes sense for us to be patient and methodical and intentional with how we do this to protect ourselves from kind of the legal considerations later in the process. And that's, so I know we had some different timelines before. This is probably a little bit closer to where we're at now. And it is important that we take this time, so.
And the good news is we do have some cushion and we did start early, but yeah, it's a very onerous process. And we do have one other thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
On Wild Horse?
On Wild Horse, yeah. Well, we have one other thing not on Wild Horse in a few minutes, but one other thing associated with Wild Horse. We talked to you, or Sarah talked to you about Park County and the communications we're having with Park County. They have requested an update for their county commissioners in February, which we have no problem going and presenting, but would like to invite both of you, if you're available and interested, to join us in Park County. The thought was we would invite the Water Policy Committee members and probably Mayor Kaufman, since we're meeting with the county commissioners, public meeting, etc. So obviously staff would be there. They've requested an update presentation, so kind of similar to what you just got. But would love to have you join us if you're interested and available. If not, we can always make it happen. But since we will have elected officials that are the main audience, appropriate to have you with us if you'd like.
From a timing perspective, they have a working session every Tuesday at 9 a.m. except for the second Tuesday of the month. Right now, we're looking at February 25th at 9 a.m. We had been confirmed for the 18th. We have some scheduling issues with that, so I have a call into the interim city manager, but I didn't, based on how that conversation went, I wouldn't expect that would be an issue to shift it to the 25th. I'm just waiting to hear that confirmation. So 9 a.m. on the 25th is what we're shooting for.
It looks good for me.
And it's about
Yep,
a
I could do.
drive if you were going to be there in person.
And we can meet here and provide the transportation up and back.
Perfect.
Okay.
For sure we'll drive this time. Okay, great. We will send a calendar hold invite out for both of you for that, and definitely appreciate that willingness to join us up there.
Yes, Councilmember Bergan.
Yeah, just to wrap up the whole Wild Horse thing. Since we thought this thing was going to be built, I think by now, or not now, but close, can we do some sort of analysis of the beginning, what we thought was going to be the process, and why we thought it was going to go much faster versus the reality now? And I think, you know, to Councilmember Coombs' point, acquiring land without having knowledge that we would have to go through everything that you just presented. I mean, would that have changed our decision to purchase land? Maybe not. It'd be nice to see, and maybe this is something that could be presented legislatively to illustrate the dire need for reservoir storage, and yet all the regulations and bureaucracy that delays it. I don't know if there's any way to streamline the process. Maybe all of this has to happen the way it happens, but it seems like there could be some improvements in the process. So I was just wondering, is there a way to analyze that
We've
with
looked at
with cost also
and
that we've already spent?
Yeah, we can pull that together. Ironically, part of what has happened to us was legislation that was passed federally a few years ago
Right.
called the federal NEPA streamlining process, which said federal agencies only get 2 years from the issuance of the NOI to when they have to have a final decision. And so what they did, again, in theory, it was great. We advocated for it. And it was part of the reason we thought we could move this a little quicker. What it resulted in, though, is the federal agencies said, whoa, wait a second. If we only have 2 years to get through from NOI to decision, we've got to move all the work that historically could happen during that process ahead of that process. So a lot of what we're having to do now was a result of the federal streamlining.
Right, but we would have to have done the work anyway. So whether it's ahead or behind or simultaneously, all this work is taking a lot of time.
It's maybe a little bit debatable. The way it used to work is you'd get into the process after the NOI and kind of see which groups were going to threaten lawsuits and do different things. And then the process would react. So for example, on cultural resources, we would have gone into the process, had communication, seen what the groups interested in those resources were insisting happen, and then we would have done those things. That's how, what's Parker's Reservoir? Ruder Hess. That's how it worked on Ruder Hess.
And how long did that one take to build?
Much less
not
time.
build, but from start.
To get through the permitting process was much shorter than what we're dealing with. Because now what has happened is the BLM said, well, wait a second. We don't want to get ourselves sued, which you can't blame them for. So it might have resulted in the need for an ethnographic survey during that process if people got excited. So since we don't want to get sued and we don't have much time, you guys now need to do an ethnographic survey ahead of time. So it may or may not have been required under the old process, but because of the changes, they're now requiring it. And they're going to try to work with us on streamlining that part, but it's definitely added work ahead of time in a NEPA process that may or may not have been needed under the old process.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, I'm kind of thinking in comparison to our development side of building homes and commercial development, and how Laura Perry had to go through with Public Works and all the departments to see where we could streamline things for the development community to reduce cost, because time, the longer you take to do something, the more costly it is. So what I'm getting at with this whole thing is almost like an exercise of going back, looking at what we spent, and that's including labor of all your staff that has had to do all this work, and then just being able to illustrate to, I don't know if it's the federal government, these state agencies, the federal agencies, to be able to illustrate, this is what we went through, and this was a constraint, and can this be done in conjunction with this? I don't know. It just seems like there needs to be some major overhaul.
Yeah, we would probably not disagree with that. We're just a little cautious on asking for overhauls now because the
Yeah.
last backfired.
Well, yeah,
Um,
yeah,
But we can pull that together. We can pull together, hey, here were the assumptions we used based on basically the Reuter-Hess example. And here's a couple of things that changed, and here's what those changes resulted in. I think it would probably not be in our best interest right now to try to do much with the federal agencies and that information, but we could pull it together and look at it definitely internally and have that conversation.
yeah. I mean, we certainly don't want to present something that's going to interfere with where we are right now, but I just think it would be a good exercise to, maybe it's down the road, to try to make some changes.
Yep, we can do that.
Certainly.
All right. Well, thank you all again. That is a lot, but also, it's exciting that we have a sense of what our path forward is as well, and hopeful that, it yields being able to continue with this site if that's what makes the most sense. Yes, Councilmember.
Oh, actually, I have one more question that I noted and didn't ask. You said it was needed to be completed by 2045 in order to maintain level of service. What is the consequence of not having it by 2045 to maintain level of service? Is that a cost to our residents? And is that a restriction of water usage?
Yes, likely both of those things. One of the things that we didn't talk too much about, in the process, there's also something called the no action, which they evaluate that says, if this reservoir were to not be approved, what would you do? The no action that we are including is an ASR project, and that partially meets that need. It is significantly more complex. It's less reliable just because of the infrastructure required to do it. But theoretically, that would help some. But it certainly doesn't get to the need. But you're exactly right. It changes our ability, especially during times of drought, to meet water supply needs.
So drought restrictions would become more frequent and longer, and that would be the main impact. Either this is not an inexpensive project, so cost impact on the customers would be hard to predict, because aquifer storage and recovery is expensive, wild horse is expensive. But for sure, our water supply availability becomes extremely stressed, and we would have more frequent and longer drought restrictions.
Okay.
And likely have to have a conversation about limiting growth until we had some solutions that were robust available.
Water quality.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's
Well,
I think when Marcia was talking about kind of the information to put together on this project, I've just been running through that in my head in terms of the work that has been done with land acquisitions. And I will say it's only been probably a year and a half, right, in terms of the formal process. There are other reservoir examples that we can include that have taken a long time to do. NISP was, Chimney Hollow as an example is a 20-year project. So I think what Marshall had said about, what we can do with that information now, right, versus kind of framing that up for other conversations in terms of the bigger picture is, maybe something else we can provide. So.
And Lauren just whispered, and this is a good point, I think it's fair. The way our system works, there would be a water quality impact as well. We use our mountain supplies to blend TDS down. So when I said cost would be difficult to predict, there would be a cost impact on our either maintaining our existing water quality, we'd have to figure out other ways to do that, or the water quality in the system would change and we wouldn't have necessarily the best water in the country, which we currently probably do. In my opinion, I'm biased, but.
There's other people who have voted on that, so.
Right.
So thanks for all the great questions and, good thing we had a short agenda today.
Yes,
I'm gonna get out here in like 20 minutes and I just blew that apart, so.
Well,
that's okay.
my questions added.
That was very helpful. So thank you again. And so we'll move on to the next item, which is miscellaneous matters for consideration. So are there any from staff?
We do have one. I mentioned we had a
Okay.
couple of things, so we have, Vern, would you like to talk about what?
Sure. So yeah, shifting gears a bunch. First off, I want to just introduce myself, Councilmember Coombs. I am Vern Adam. I'm the Deputy Director of Engineering Services here at Aurora Water. And nice to see you, Councilmember Bergan. We've met before. I have assumed Sarah Young's roles and responsibilities for oversight of the Planning and Engineering Division while she focuses her efforts on the Wild Horse program. And so you'll be seeing me regularly here at our policy committee meetings. And this particular item is in September of 23, we entered an extraterritorial agreement with the Elora subdivision, a Sheldon group area that is at the southeast corner of County Line and Delbert. And at that time, we were developing some IGAs with them about the use of the right-of-way. And so that IGA is now in front of us today in concert with the extraterritorial agreement for use of the right-of-way in Delbert, which is not a city right-of-way. And the Public Works Department has also entered 2 other IGAs with Elora for the use of County Line Road and an intersection at Delbert and County Line Road. This is the 3rd of those 3. And this one is really just the use of the right-of-way for our water line to serve their site that will reside in Delbert Road. So it's fairly straightforward. So of course, being the Sheldon group, they're on a rush. So one of the asks here is that we skip study session and go right to the regular meeting on the 27th.
And part of the reason we think that might be appropriate is because this is the right-of-way piece associated with the IGA that council approved for the extraterritorial service. So it's a follow-on piece of detail needed to accomplish the IGA. It's a little bit different than the ones Public Works has done that weren't necessarily tied to the extraterritorial agreement, I don't believe.
No, that's correct. It really just speaks to the maintenance and the burden of the district to modify the water line relocation in the event of a widening of the roadway or resurfacing, that we're not obligated to do that. The district is obligated to make those modifications.
Which again is contemplated in the IGA for extraterritorial service, but this agreement formalizes that responsibility that they would have. So we're sure not to burden ourselves with that.
Okay, I'm comfortable with moving that forward to a regular meeting. And Councilmember Bergan is shaking her head yes, so I think
Yes.
we're good with that. The committee approves of moving that forward.
Thank you.
All right, and then Councilmember Bergan, do you have any items kind of for future meetings that you want to see besides what you mentioned about kind of reviewing the process?
Not off the top of my head. today.
So yeah, let's think about that for our next meeting. We'll just think about agenda items from the committee. So maybe we can just add that to the agenda for the next meeting, that we have time for committee members to bring forward any proposed agenda items. Yes.
Can we just, you can just email it, but can we get kind of the topics, the main presentations, not every IGA or whatever, main presentations that we did last year?
A summary, sure.
Yeah.
All right, awesome. So we'll look at that at our next meeting, which is currently scheduled for February 19th at 10:30 a.m. Does that work for you, Councilmember Bergan?
I believe so. I'm just looking real quick here.
And then there are no staff conflicts
I've
with
got it.
that, Marcel?
We can make it work. We periodically have people covering for other people due to vacations and things, but we can absolutely support a meeting on the 19th.
Okay, excellent. Well, then that's what we'll schedule it for. We'll plan to discuss future meeting topics and any other items that you all have for us to discuss.
The council tour dates? Yeah.
Oh.
Oh, the 20.
Oh,
Yeah, we do
water
have
tour dates.
tentative dates for the water tour that we also, thank you, Casey, wanted to make sure we double checked with you all on.
So we're right now looking at August 27th and 28th. That is going to be, we were trying to look at all things that go on in the world, and we think that might be the best date to have it. It is the week after Colorado Water Congress. So I just wanted to see if you guys were okay with moving that forward.
And
Let me double check.
while you're looking, I should have, before turning that over to Shawnee, mentioned to both of you that Shawnee is in Greg Baker's new role, or old role. The old Greg Baker is the new Shawnee Klein.
Yeah.
So she's Deputy Director of Internal and External Relations. She's been with us for about a year as the Public Relations Manager. So she's stepped up and assumed some additional responsibility since Greg, for whatever reason, decided he needed to retire.
For whatever reason. All right, those dates look fine to me.
Yeah, I mean, I will ask to move a meeting, but I mean, we've got so much notice, it should be okay. So.
Okay, so if you're comfortable with those, we will start that routing process with the paperwork to get those dates vetted with the rest of council and tentatively plan on those days.
Okay, sounds good. Well,
Awesome.
thank you all so much. We appreciate all the information, all the efforts. Look forward to continuing to work with you throughout this year. And with that, the meeting is adjourned.